12 underrated 80s R&B groups you forgot existed. 12 names, 12 R&B groups from the 1980s. Some of these names you will recognize, some you will not. But by the time we reach number 1, I can promise you this, every single one of them will feel like someone you were always supposed to know. This is their story, told properly, finally. Number 12, Champaign. Before I tell you what the industry did with this group, I need to tell you who they were, because that is the part that makes everything else matter. Champaign were a 7-piece band from Champaign, Illinois, an interracial group at a time in American pop music when that still required a kind of courage nobody in the room wanted to name out loud. Polly Carmen and Rena Jones on lead vocals, Dana Walden and Michael Day on keyboards, Leon Reeder on guitar, Michael Reed on bass, Rocky Maffitt on percussion. They were a complete band, a full picture. On Valentine's Day, 1981, they released How About Us on Columbia Records. Dana Walden had written the song years earlier under the group's previous name, the Water Brothers Band, and it had been sitting, waiting for the right moment. When it finally arrived as a Champaign single, it was everything a debut was supposed to be. It hit number 4 on the R&B chart, number 12 on the Billboard Hot 100, number 5 in the United Kingdom. It sat at the top of the adult contemporary chart for 2 weeks. A song about asking whether what you have is worth keeping, and the world answered yes. And then the world moved on. A second album, a third, a fourth. The crossover audience that had said yes to them in 1981 never returned with the same force. Polly Carmen eventually left for a solo career. Member Michael Day died of cancer on June 7, 2001. The group that released one of the most elegant R&B ballads of the decade, on Valentine's Day no less, is now a name most people cannot place. This name deserves to be in your memory after today. Number 11, One Way, featuring Al Hudson. Let me tell you who they were before I tell you what happened to them. Al Hudson had been building something since 1976, Detroit, Michigan. The group went through multiple incarnations, the Soul Partners, Al Hudson and the Partners, before arriving at a name that said exactly what they were: One Way, forward, no looking back. When vocalist Alicia Myers joined the lineup, she brought a lead voice the band had been waiting for without knowing it. Her writing was sharp, her delivery was magnetic. Together, they developed a sound built on layered funk rhythms and warm harmonic intimacy. Not the kind of music that announced itself, but the kind that settled into a room and stayed. Alicia Myers co-wrote You Can Do It in 1979. It became an R&B hit in the United States and a club hit in the United Kingdom. And then in 1982, One Way released Cutie Pie, number 4 on the Billboard R&B chart. Weeks on the chart, their highest charting pop moment, 5 top 10 R&B hits over their career. Signed to MCA Records from 1980 to 1988, present, consistent, quietly excellent. And then Alicia Myers left the group in 1981 to pursue a solo career. And without her, something irreplaceable departed with her. They kept recording, they kept releasing. They moved to Capitol Records in 1988, one final album in 1989. And then the silence that follows when a band outlasts its center of gravity. If this name was in your house growing up, you already understand what I'm saying. One Way was the kind of group that found you in your living room, in the car, at the kitchen table. And then one day they weren't there anymore, and nobody explained why. Real talk, only 9% of you are subscribed. That hurts. We're spending hours digging through archives, fact-checking every detail, bringing these stories back to life. And if you're watching this far, you clearly care. So hit subscribe. It's free and takes 2 seconds. Now, to my subscribers, barely any of you have joined the membership. And honestly, that stings even more. You know the work we put in. You keep coming back. If these videos have ever made you feel something, if this music means something to you, join the membership. It's $1 coffee a month, and it's the only way we keep this going. Let's build this together. All right, back to it. Number 10, Club Nouveau. J. King had built something with Timex Social Club. Their 1986 hit Rumors was a genuine cultural moment. And then a management dispute tore the group apart. Some members signed with an outside manager. King was furious. He took 2 of the remaining members, producers Denzel Foster and Thomas McElroy, alongside singers Valerie Watson and Samuel Prater, and started over. He called the new group Club Nouveau, French for new club, born from a fracture, built from what was left. Their debut album, Life, Love, and Pain, was released in 1986 on Warner Brothers Records. It produced 4 consecutive hit singles. Their cover of Bill Withers' Lean on Me, urgent, beat heavy, built for the floor, went to number 1 on the Billboard Hot 100 in 1987. Think about what that means. It became only the 5th song in pop history to reach number 1 twice, by 2 entirely different artists. 5 songs, ever, and Club Nouveau did it. At the 1988 Grammy Awards, that version of Lean on Me won Best R&B Song. And I want to be precise about this. The Grammy for Best R&B Song is a Songwriters Award. It goes to the person who wrote the song. Lean on Me was written by Bill Withers. So the Grammy, the statue, the ceremony, the recognition went to Bill Withers, not to J. King. Not to the people who rebuilt a classic, brought it back to number 1, and proved it was still necessary. They had the hit. The Grammy exists because of their recording, and the statue went home with someone else. And whether the industry made that decision consciously or not, I think you already know the answer. Number 9, Dazz Band. Their name is a portmanteau. Danceable jazz. That is what they were and what they set out to be. And it tells you everything about where Bobby Harris was coming from when he assembled this group in Cleveland, Ohio. Not a calculated commercial move, a musical philosophy with a name attached to it. The Dazz Band had been through earlier incarnations, Bell Telefunk, Kinsman Dazz, before signing with Motown Records in 1980 and beginning their real build. When Let It Whip arrived in 1982, it was constructed with care. Drum machine rhythm underneath live drums, a Minimoog bass line underneath a real electric bass. Producers Reggie Andrews and Leon Ndugu Chancellor built something layered and specific, and the result hit number 1 on the Billboard R&B chart for 5 weeks. It crossed over to number 5 on the Billboard Hot 100. In 1983, Let It Whip won the Grammy Award for Best R&B Performance by a Duo or Group with Vocals. The Dazz Band became the first group from Cleveland, Ohio to win a Grammy Award. On December 31, 1982, the mayor of Cleveland presented Bobby Harris and the Dazz Band with the key to the city. There were official proclamations from the state of Ohio. There was a night, a real documented night, when an entire city looked at these musicians and said, "You have done something that will not be forgotten." And I want you to hold something in your mind as we move forward on this list, because a pattern is beginning to take shape. These groups won awards, they had platinum albums, they received official recognition from the cities that claimed them, and the culture, the larger culture, the one that writes the history the next generation learns, moved on without them. There is one more example on this list where that pattern becomes the most specific and the most deliberate. We will get there. The Dazz Band placed over 20 singles on the Billboard R&B chart. Most people who love R&B music cannot name them. And that is not their failure, it is ours. Number 8, Starpoint. Before I tell you what happened, I need you to understand who they were. Because what happened matters more when you know the people it happened to. Starpoint were, at their core, a family. 4 Phillips brothers from Crownsville, Maryland, George, Ernesto, Gregory, and Orlando, alongside bassist Kayode Adeyemo and their lead vocalist René Diggs. And I want to be precise about something. René Diggs and Ernesto Phillips were also romantic partners, a family inside a group, a love story inside a band. Every note they made carried that intimacy, not as performance, but as fact. They had been recording since 1979. Chocolate City Records, then Casablanca, then Elektra, a decade of building, a decade of R&B chart appearances. And in 1985, with the release of their album Restless, they arrived. Object of My Desire peaked at number 8 on the R&B chart and crossed over to number 25 on the Billboard Hot 100. Seven top 10 R&B singles over their Elektra years. A sound that was warm and direct and entirely theirs. And then, while they were on tour in 1985, at the absolute peak of their momentum, Renee Diggs was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis, a chronic, progressive disease of the central nervous system. And I need you to hold that for a moment. She did not stop. She kept performing. She kept recording. She kept singing on stages that became progressively harder for her to stand on. She and Ernesto continued to make music together, continued to give the group everything she had, while managing a disease that was quietly taking pieces of her life. Ernesto Phillips died in 2004. Renee Diggs died in 2005, within a year of each other. The family that made Object of My Desire is gone, and most people who love that song have never known any of this. Number 7, Loose Ends. Carl McIntosh, Jane Eugene, and Steve Nicol were from London. Steve Nicol had studied at the London Guildhall School of Music and Drama. He toured with The Jam in 1982 as a trumpet, trombone, and keyboard player. He found Carl McIntosh through an audition. He found Jane Eugene at a college fashion show, 3 people from different corners of London, building something the city didn't quite have a category for. British artists making American R&B not as imitation, but as the real thing. They formed in 1980. They signed to Virgin Records. Their first UK success came early. But the defining moment arrived with their 1985 single, Hangin' on a String, contemplating from their second album, So Where Are You? In the UK, their home country, it made the top 20. Respectable. In the United States, it went to number 1 on the Billboard R&B chart. And that moment made history, because when Hangin' on a String reached number 1 in America in 1985, Loose Ends became the first British band in history to top the United States R&B chart. Think about what that means. American R&B, its roots, its architecture, its entire emotional grammar built from generations of specific American experience, had never once been led to the top of its own chart by a British group. Until 3 people from London, one of whom found his lead singer at a fashion show, walked in and did it. I will say clearly what most people in this conversation won't. That is a remarkable achievement, and the fact that most music listeners have never heard the name Loose Ends, despite that achievement, is exactly the kind of history this channel exists to correct. Slow Down also reached number 1 on the US R&B chart in 1986. Watching You, Watching Me charted in 1988. and then the group fell apart over differences in musical direction. The first British band to top American R&B, a wall with no plaque on it. Number 6, Mtume. You know this song. It has been part of the culture for decades. It has been sampled and referenced and recognized by people who may not know where it came from or what it cost to bring it into the world. Knowing the song and knowing what the industry tried to do to stop it, those are two different kinds of knowing. Let me give you the second one. James Mtume was the son of jazz saxophonist Jimmy Heath, one of the legendary Heath brothers. He was a percussionist who played with Miles Davis from 1971 to 1975. This was not someone who stumbled into R&B. This was someone who arrived from the highest level of jazz with that architecture already in his hands and decided to redirect it towards something that could reach more people. He formed the group Mtume in 1978, signed with Epic Records. They built a sound that lived between jazz, funk, and what would eventually be called Quiet Storm. In 1982, James Mtume wrote Juicy Fruit in a single night. Lead vocalist Tawatha Agee was in London, on tour with Roxy Music. He called her back. They completed the recording at 2 a.m. She sang the words as he was still writing them. When Mtume brought the completed record to Epic Records, the label did not want to release it. They believed radio would not play it. They felt the song was too much. Juicy Fruit hit number 1 on the Billboard R&B chart on June 4, 1983. It stayed there for 8 weeks. It sold over 1 million copies in the United States, a certified million seller, without ever cracking the pop top 40. Without meaningful crossover radio support, without the machine that would have pushed an equivalent record by a white artist onto every station in the country. The Wrigley Chewing Gum Company called James Mtume. Their lawyers initially threatened a lawsuit, believing the song infringed on their trademark. Mtume told them plainly what the song was about. The lawsuit conversation ended. A million copies, 8 weeks at number 1. And the pop chart kept its door closed. The music survived. The segregation of American radio in that era, the specific, documented, deliberate separation of black R&B from pop radio access. That is the rest of the story, and it deserves to be said that clearly. Number 5, Midnight Star. Reggie Calloway and his brother Vincent formed Midnight Star in 1976 at Kentucky State University. What they assembled around them: vocalist Belinda Lipscomb, guitarist Melvin Gentry, keyboardist Bo Watson, bassist Kenneth Gant, drummer Bobby Lovelace, multi-instrumentalist Bill Simmons, was a self-sufficient group. Musicians who could produce, arrange, write, and perform. The kind of assembly the industry rarely appreciates fully until it is gone. They signed to Solar Records. Their 1983 album, No Parking on the Dance Floor, went double platinum. Freakazoid hit number 2 on the R&B chart. Their 1984 single Operator hit number 1 on the R&B chart for 5 weeks, their only top 40 pop crossover, reaching number 18 on the Hot 100. Their 1986 album Headlines sold gold, 3 albums crossing platinum or gold, 7 top 10 R&B singles, a genuine, documented run. And while they were building all of that, while they were charting and producing and delivering, the Calloway brothers were doing something else, something that would outlast every album they made. The Calloway brothers introduced a young musician to Solar Records executives and brought him into the Solar orbit, producing records for his group. That musician was Babyface. The group the Callaways produced for was The Deal. And what happened to Babyface's career after that introduction? The albums he produced, the voices he shaped, the architecture he built under some of the biggest names in 80s and 90s R&B needs no further description here. Some of you are going to look this connection up after this ends. Good. That is exactly the point. A double platinum group from Kentucky State University opened a door for one of the defining figures in R&B history. The culture walks through that door every day without knowing who left it open. By 1988, Reggie and Vincent Calloway had left Midnight Star to form their own group, Calloway. The band dissolved, the name faded, the music stayed, and the name didn't. And that is not the same thing. Number 4, René and Angela. Before I tell you what became of them, I need you to understand where they came from. Because the gap between where they started and where they arrived, and then where they disappeared, is a specific kind of loss. Angela Winbush had been part of Stevie Wonder's backing group, Wonderlove. That is the musical pedigree she brought to this partnership. René Moore was the brother of Bobby Watson, a key architect inside Rufus. They met in Los Angeles. They formed René and Angela in 1977. Both of them were writers. Both of them were producers. They were not just two voices. They were two architects who happened to also be a duo. 4 albums on Capitol Records from 1980 through 1984. Consistent R&B chart appearances. Their 1983 single, My First Love, peaked at number 12 R&B. Building, patiently, methodically. In 1985, they signed with Mercury Records and made Street Called Desire. That album went platinum. Save Your Love for Hashkell 1 went to number 1 on the R&B chart for 2 weeks. And it featured rapper Curtis Blow, making it one of the earliest documented collaborations between hip-hop and R&B on a charting record. Your Smile also went to number 1. I'll Be Good hit number 4. 4 top 10 R&B hits from a single album. A platinum certification, everything a partnership could produce. And then it was over. The personal weight of two people who had built something entirely together, the creative tension and the private tension that share a wall, pulled the duo apart by 1986. Angela Winbush went on to write and produce for Ronald Isley. For New Edition, she became one of the most consequential creative forces in 80s and 90s R&B. Her fingerprints are in records people still play every week without knowing her name. If you know the music she built after René and Angela ended, and most of you do, then you know what she became. But you may not know where she came from. This is where she came from. Number 3. Force M.D's. Stevie D and his brother Antoine, known as TCD, Lundy. Their uncle Jesse Lee Daniels. Their friends Trisco Pearson and Charles Mercury Nelson. 5 men from Staten Island, New York. Before they had a stage, they had the Staten Island Ferry. They had the street corners of Greenwich Village in Lower Manhattan. They sang where people were, for whatever people gave them. That is not a metaphor for how they operated. That is literally how they built their voice, in the open air, for strangers, before anyone handed them a contract. They signed to Tommy Boy Records in 1984 as the Force M.D's, Musical Diversity. Their 1984 single Tears established them immediately as something real, harmonies that reached back into doo-wop with a grounding that the decade hadn't earned yet. In 1985, Tender Love arrived, written and produced by Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis, featured in the film Crush Groove. It hit number 4 on the R&B chart and number 10 on the Billboard Hot 100. In 1987, Love is a House went to number 1 on the R&B chart. Consistent, excellent, present. And then the losses began. TCD, Antoine Lundy, died. Mercury, Charles Nelson, died. Trisco Pearson, died. Jesse Lee Daniels, died. DJ Dr. Rock, died. The group that started singing for Spare Change on the Staten Island Ferry has watched most of its founding members leave this world. And the music they made together, the harmonies they worked out before anyone gave them a stage, is still out there, still playing, in films, in compilations, on radio stations in cities where nobody knows these men's names. That is the truth of what happened, and it deserves to be said that clearly. Number 2, Slave. Let me tell you who they were before I tell you what became of them. Slave were formed in Dayton, Ohio, in 1975. Trumpeter Steve Washington and trombonist Floyd Miller assembled them from the ground up with a sound rooted in deep Ohio funk, honest and layered and built to last. Dayton was producing something specific in those years. Ohio Players, Zap, Heatwave, and Slave was in that conversation from the beginning. Their debut single, Slide, went to #1 on the R&B chart in 1977. They did not work their way to the top. They arrived. In 1978, a young drummer from Dayton named Steve Arrington joined the group. He had spent time on the West Coast studying with members of the Escovedo family, Pete, Coke, and Sheila Escovedo. He brought that sensibility into Slave's framework, and then, by degrees, he became the voice, a drummer who became a frontman, a percussionist who sang. His delivery on Just a Touch of Love, a top 10 R&B hit in 1979, and on Watching You, another top 10 R&B hit in 1980, defined what Slave sounded like to the world. Sampled later by Snoop Dogg, sourced by hip-hop producers for decades, the DNA of Dayton funk carried in one man's voice. In 1982, Steve Arrington left Slave to form his own group, and the center of the band left with him. Multiple other founding members departed to form a separate group, Aura. Slave continued into the mid-1990s, but the energy that had put them at #1 departed. And then, in 1986, Steve Arrington found religion. He eventually left the music business to become a minister, voluntarily, with intention. The man whose voice the culture had built into something lasting chose something the culture could not touch. The music survived him. Slide, and Watching You, and Just a Touch of Love, and the samples that came from them, the producers who borrowed them, the artists who built new things from what Slave left behind. The music is still in the world. The group that made it is almost entirely unnamed, and this is where we arrive. #1, the S.O.S. Band. S.O.S. sounds of success, and they were. They were formed in Atlanta, Georgia, in 1977. Mary Davis on lead vocals, Jason Bryant on keyboards, Billy Ellis and Willie Sonny Killebrew on horns, Bruno Spate on guitar, John Simpson on bass, James Earl Jones III on drums. An Atlanta group named after what they intended to become. Their debut single, Take Your Time, Do It Right, was released in 1980. It hit #1 on the R&B chart for 5 weeks. It reached #3 on the Billboard Hot 100. It was certified platinum, not a slow arrival, not an underground hit waiting to be discovered. A debut single that went to the top immediately with full force in both formats. They built on it. Multiple gold albums, consistent chart presence through the early 1980s, named, present, real. In 1983, for their 4th album, On the Rise, they brought in 2 producers who were also members of Prince's touring and backing group, The Time. Their names were Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis. And what happened during those production sessions in Atlanta in the summer of 1983 is the story that most people have never been taught to connect back to the S.O.S. band. During the sessions for On the Rise, a snowstorm struck. Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis were in Atlanta, working. The Time had a concert scheduled. Because of the weather, Jam and Lewis missed it. Prince discovered this. He fired them immediately, both of them, for working outside the group without permission. The song they produced in Atlanta, the one that was being made the night that cost them their positions, was Just Be Good to Me. It hit number 2 on the Billboard R&B chart. It spent 22 weeks on the chart. It became one of the defining R&B records of 1983, and it was made on the night that changed the direction of everything. Because Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis, fired, released from the structure that had defined their professional lives, went out and built something. They formed their own independent production company. And what they made from that point forward was Janet Jackson's Control and Rhythm Nation 1814. New Edition, Johnny Gill, the most consequential production legacy in 80s and 90s R&B, assembled in the aftermath of a snowstorm in Atlanta during a session with the S.O.S. band. This is the pattern I mentioned at number 9. The group that gave the most, that built the rooms, that opened the doors, was almost never the one whose name the culture preserved. The S.O.S. band gave the music, take your time, do it right. They gave it, just be good to me. And they gave it, without knowing it, the conditions under which Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis built their empire. You know Control. You know Rhythm Nation. You know everything Jam and Lewis built. And now you know where that story starts. I know. Take a second with that. This is what we owe them. Not a chart position, not a streaming number, a proper telling. Their story, said clearly. Their name, said first.